In this video, we are going to write the Android part of the video call application that we are creating for Android natively. And inside the app, we are going to use the real-time Firebase database to transfer some of the data from one client to another. So create a new Firebase project. Give it some name. I'm going to call it Android. Let me just remove this caps lock. I don't like capital. Android video call. Click on continue and accept these things. Create the project. Click on continue once this thing is ready. Before we add an Android app to this Firebase project, we will need to create the Android project. So open Android Studio. Create a new project, language Kotlin and minimum SDK 21. Let me also change the name. I'm gonna name it video call app and then click on finish. Once the project loads up, go to build.gradle and copy the application ID. Now go back to Firebase console and then click on this Android icon. Paste the application ID here and then click on register app. Download the Google services.json file and then go to the folder where this file is downloaded. Copy it and then go to Android Studio. Change this Android to project level and in the project directory paste the Google services.json file. Now go back to the console. Click on next. Copy this class path and go to the Android. Change this project to Android again and this time go to build.gradle project level. Paste the class path here and make sure in the repositories Google is added and then go back to the console. Copy this plugin, paste it here. We will need to add the dependency of the Firebase real-time database. So just add that implementation. It is com.google.firebase Firebase database ktx 19.4.0. I'll just put this thing in the description. You can directly copy it from there. Once you have added these things, just click on sync now. And while the project syncs, go back to the console. Just click next. We can skip this step. Now go to the real-time database and then click on create database. And here change the read and write rules to true. Since this is just a tutorial, I'm just going to ignore this warning. But in a real application, you should not do that. Now we can close this console and go back to Android Studio. The project has synced. Now go to the manifest. And here we will declare all the permissions that we are going to require. We will need the camera permission, record audio permission, internet, and we will also need the permission to modify audio settings. And other than that, in the application tag, set uses clear text traffic to true. You need to set it to true if your application is going to fetch data from a server that is not secure. So for example, if the server has HTTP instead of HTTPS, then we need to set this to true. So just set it to true and now go to the activity main.xml. Click on this split button and let me increase the size of this. Change the root element to relative layout. No, change it to linear layout. That will be easier. Then add and edit text. Width match parent, height wrap content. We are going to add a hint that will say enter a username. Let's also give a padding of 16 dp to the children of this linear layout. Give this edit text an ID. I'm gonna name it username edit. Then we will need a button, width match parent, height wrap content. You don't see the button because we have to set the orientation of this linear layout to vertical. Give this button an ID. I'm gonna call it login button. The text on this button is going to be login. And now go to main activity.kt and let me just hide all these files so it looks a little cleaner. Now before I write anything here, I'm going to include all the assets like all those HTML, CSS and JavaScript that we wrote in the last video. So for that, first we will create the assets folder. So right click on this and then new folder. Click on assets folder and then click on finish. You should be able to see the folder here. Now open the folder where all your CSS and JavaScript file is located. Copy this entire thing and then paste it in the assets folder. We're also going to need a few vectors. So right click on this drawable folder, new vector asset, search for video cam, change the color to white, next, finish. Right click again and another one is video cam off. And then we will need two more for the mic. Search mic, select that, next, finish. And just one last for the mic off. Next and finish. Now go to main activity.kt. Here create a variable named permissions, and this will be an array of all the permissions that we are going to ask the user. The first one is manifest.permission camera. The second one is the record audio permission. And then just another one which I will call request code, and then I will initialize this with value 1. And inside the onCreate, I'm gonna check if permission is granted. If it is not granted, then I'm going to ask the user for the permissions. Press Alt Enter and create this function is permission granted. This is going to return a boolean. By default, this function is going to return true. And now inside this, we are going to iterate through each of the permissions in the permissions array. And then I'm going to check if the permission is granted. So activity compat.check self permission, context this, permission it. And if it is not granted, then I'm going to return false. Now put the cursor on this ask permissions function, press Alt Enter, create this thing, and here just simply call activity compat request permissions, activity this, and then pass the permissions array. And the last parameter that we will pass is the request code variable. Now in the onCreate, we will initialize the Firebase app, and then the login button that we have in the XML, we will set this thing on click listener, and when this is clicked, then we will get the username from the username edit, which is also available in the XML. And now we will create an object of intent, and this intent will take us from this activity to call activity. We haven't created this call activity yet, so right click on this resources folder, new activity, select empty activity and name this call activity. Now go back to main activity.kt, add the username extra to this intent, The name for this will be just username, and pass the username variable to the second argument, and then simply start this intent. Before we write the call activity, let's first understand why are we going to need the Firebase real-time database. So let's set up a scenario where we have two users, Mihir and John, logged into the app. And when they log in into the app, they will also join the PeerJS server with a unique ID. And now let's imagine that Mihir wants to call John. So Mihir is going to need John's unique ID so that it can tell the PeerJS server that I want to call this guy. And to exchange the user ID, the unique ID, we are going to use the Firebase real-time database. So if Mihir wants to call John, then he is going to press on a call button, and what will that do is it will write a new object into the real-time Firebase database, and that object is going to be the name of John. And John on the other side will be listening to any changes to the incoming key on the object John. So as soon as Mihir calls John, an object gets written into the real-time database, and that object has an incoming property. Since John was listening to that incoming property, he will be notified that Mihir is calling. And now John will get to decide if he wants to accept that call or not. And when John accepts Mihir's call, then two values will be written into the John object in the real-time database. The first value is the connection ID of John, and the second value is available. This is going to be a boolean and it will be set to true. Now Mihir on the other side will be listening to the isAvailable property onto the John object. So as soon as the value in the isAvailable key changes to true, Mihir will be notified that John has accepted the call, and then Mihir can also read the connection ID of John, and then it can tell PeerJS server that I want to call the person with this connection ID, and then the call will get connected. This may sound a little confusing, but if you write the code, if you complete it, then you will be able to understand the entire logic. First, let's prepare the layout for this call activity. Go to activity call.xml and then change this to split mode. Replace the root element with relative layout, and inside this add a WebView, width and height match parent. Give this an ID. I'm gonna call it WebView. Add another relative layout. Set width to match parent, height wrap content, background sharp CCC, and I'm also going to give this relative layout an ID, and that will be call layout. This layout is going to contain the views that will help the user accept or reject any incoming call. Inside this, add a text view, set width and height to wrap content. For now, let the text on this be someone is calling. Give this a padding as well. A padding of 20 dp will look good. The text style is going to be bold, and the ID for this is going to be incoming call text. Now I'm going to add two image views that will contain the accept or reject call icons. I had forgotten to add those vectors, so right click on the drawable folder, new vector asset, search for call, change the color to green. This will look good. Next, finish, and then another one for the reject call. Call end, select that. Next, finish, and then add an image view. Width and height both will be wrap content. SRC will be call. ID will be accept button, and a padding of 20 dp will look good as well on this. Now add another image view. Width and height wrap content, source will be call end, ID will be reject button. The color is not supposed to be green on this, I'll just change it to red. The padding is going to be 20 dp as well here. This is going to be aligned at the end of the parent, so set that to true. And this accept button will be at the start of the reject button. So set to start off to reject button. I don't like the color of this accept button, so I'm going to change it to something dark. I think this will look good. Yeah, that will work. Now add another relative layout below this relative layout. Set width match parent, height wrap content. Give it a margin of 16 dp and align this thing at the bottom of the screen. The ID is going to be input layout. In this relative layout, we are going to add the views through which we can accept the username of the person the user is going to call, and it will also contain the call button. I will just paste the views that will go inside this. We have an edit text, width match parent, height wrap content. ID here is friend name edit, and this is placed at the start of this button. Hint on this is who do you want to call. And then we have a call button, which once pressed will take the username from this edit text and send a call request to that username. And finally, I'm going to include one linear layout, which will contain the mute audio and the mute video button. The width on this will be match parent, height will be wrap content, the gravity will be center, align parent bottom, that also true, and margin bottom will be 64 dp. The ID of this, I'm gonna call it call control layout, and I'll just paste the views that will go inside it. So basically we have two image views, width and height 36 dp for each. They also have this background. The padding on this is 4 dp, and the source is video cam for this image view, and for this one it is mic. The ID here is toggle video button, the ID here is toggle audio button. But all these elements are not going to be visible all the time. Only the input layout is going to be visible initially. And when someone is calling, then only we will show this layout. And once the call is connected, then we will show this layout. So set the visibility for this linear layout to gone, and change the visibility for the call layout to gone as well. Once you have this layout, we can go to the call activity.kt, and here let me just start by declaring all the global variables that we are going to need. I'll need a variable named username, and then I will need a variable friend's username, and then I will require another variable which will be named is peer connected. This will be initialized with false, and this thing will become true once the connection with the PeerJS server is successful. And then I will also need a reference to the Firebase database. So create a variable named Firebase ref, and then get the reference from the database object. Let me just import this. Database.getReference, and here we will want the reference of the users object, which will get created once we write anything to it. And now we will need just two more variables. The first one is audio. This will be initialized to true. And the second one is video. This will also be initialized with a value true. Basically, these two will help us control the mic and the video cam buttons. Now in the onCreate, let's get the username from the intent and pass it to the username variable. So username equals intent dot get string extra, and the name of the extra was username, and then we will just put exclamation marks because this thing is not gonna be null. Now I'm gonna set the call button, the mute audio and the mute video button on click listeners, but I will write the functionality of the click later. So for now, let's just add a to do here, and then same for the audio button, toggle audio button, set on click, another to do, and then a toggle video button, this as well. We'll just hold a to do for now. And the next thing that needs to be done is we need to set up the WebView. So we will do that in a separate function. Let's create this function. we will get the WebView from the XML, and the first thing that I want to give this is a web Chrome client, which is going to be an object of the web Chrome client. Press Ctrl O, and inside this we are going to implement on permission request. Now if the web page inside this web view is going to need, let's say, the camera or the microphone, then the WebView Chrome client will ask our app if we want to allow that web page for those permissions. In our app, the web page is going to ask for a record audio and the camera permission, and we are just going to allow it. But if the web page is dynamically loaded and we don't know what is there, then you should consider asking the user if they want to allow those permissions for that particular web page. So to grant the permissions, simply call request.grant and pass request.resources. This request object can be null, so put a question mark at the end of it. And now we will enable JavaScript on this web view. Actually, you will get this warning which will say that carefully use this thing, but we can ignore this warning since the JavaScript is known to us and we know what it is going to do, so it is not going to be any vulnerability here. And the next setting that we want to do is media player requires gesture. This will be set to false. And then I'm also going to add a JavaScript interface for the JavaScript to able to call the Kotlin methods. Add a JavaScript interface, and let me create this class. Create a new Kotlin file /class, and I'm gonna name this JavaScript interface. This JavaScript interface will also take an object of call activity. We are going to need it. I will tell you how. We will only have one function here, and I'm just going to write it now. On peer connected will be the name of this function, and this function will be called from the JavaScript. And when this function is called, then we will call the same function in the call activity. We haven't created this function yet, but we will do it now. Create member function on peer connected. And in this function, I'm just going to simply set is peer connected to true. So what will happen is once the peer is connected to the PeerJS server, then we will call this function from the JavaScript, and then the Kotlin will get to know that the peer is connected, and then only it will allow the user to send any call request. And now add this JavaScript interface, this call activity as a parameter, and the name of the interface. We will need this name in the JavaScript file to call that function. And we are getting this error because we also have to annotate our function with JavaScript interface. And that way the program knows that this function is a JavaScript interface function. And now the error goes. And after doing all these settings, I'm just going to load the video call in this web view. And I'll do that in a separate function. Create that function. First of all, I will create a variable that will hold the path of the call.html file. You can see it is in the assets, and the Android asset folder is stored in a static path, and that path is file:/Android_asset. And then if I put a /call.html, then the file path will take me to this call.html. And now to load this file path in the web view, just simply call webview.loadURL and then pass the file path. And once the web view gets loaded, then only we will initialize the peer. And to know when the web page loads, we have a web view client, which will be equals to an object of web view client. Press Ctrl O, and we will need the onPageFinished function. This function will be called once the web page loads. And once the web page loads, we will initialize the peer. I'll do it in a separate function in the call activity. Now from the Android side, we only have to call these functions to make this video calling work. And to be able to call the functions, I'm going to create a separate Kotlin function that will call the JS functions. And the name of this Kotlin function will be call JavaScript function, and it will take the function string as a parameter. This function string is basically going to hold the data of the function that we are going to call, and we just have to pass this into the WebView, and the WebView will call this function. But we cannot call the JavaScript function on the main thread, so we will do it on the WebView.post, and inside this, to call the function, we just have to call WebView.evaluateJavascript, pass the function string, and we are not going to need any result callback, so set that to null. And now we will call this function from this initialize peer. So just simply call JavaScript function, and here we have to pass the function string. Now to make a call to this, to make a call to this init function, we just have to type JavaScript :init, and inside this we have to pass the unique ID as a string. And how will we get a unique ID? Well, for that I will use a separate function that will be getUniqueID. This will return a string, and we will use UUID to get a unique string. So UUID.randomUUID to string. And now we have to pass the value returned from this function in this, but we have to pass it as a string, so we have to put it in quotes. And inside this I can put $, and then curly braces, and then inside the curly braces I can make a call to the getUniqueID function, and this will simply convert the result into a string because of the double quotes, and then it will call the JavaScript init function. And once the peer is initialized, I also want to look for any incoming calls that are coming to my username, and to do that I'm just going to use the Firebase reference object, and then here I have to pass the username that I want to observe, and then another child. I want to observe the incoming of this username. So to the incoming child, I am going to add a value event listener, which will be an object of value event listener, and we are getting the error because we have to implement the member functions of this value event listener. So place the cursor on this object and then press Alt Enter, implement members, select both the functions, and the onDataChange function will be called when the incoming value changes. I had planned to finish this course in this video, but we are already 25 minutes in, and it's gonna take another 20 minutes to complete this. So I will end this video here, and we will do the rest in the next video.